The day my parents left 3 empty rows at my wedding was the day I stopped pretending. I remember standing at the back of the hall, waiting for my cue, and looking out at the guests already seated. My maid of honor was beside me, squeezing my hand so hard I could feel the bones shift. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. We both looked at the left side of the room. 3 full rows, reserved, white ribbon tied to each chair. And we both counted the same number of people sitting in them, 0. My mother, my father, my younger brother and his girlfriend, my aunt and uncle who had driven all the way from Fredericton for my cousin's wedding 2 years before, but apparently couldn't manage the 40-minute drive from Oakville to downtown Hamilton, my grandmother, who I had called the night before, and who had said, and I quote, "We'll be there, sweetheart, of course we'll be there." None of them came. The ceremony started 7 minutes late because the officiant kept glancing at the door. My fiancé, now my husband, walked back to me in the waiting room and held my face in his hands and said, "We can wait a little longer if you want." I looked at him. I looked at the roses in my bouquet, blush pink, which my mother had specifically requested because they were her favorite. I had changed my entire color scheme to blush and ivory because she said dusty blue would look too cold in photos. I said, "Let's go." I walked down that aisle alone. No one on my arm. I had planned for my father to walk me down. I had imagined that moment for years. Not in a fairy tale way, just in the quiet way you assume certain things will happen. That your father will be there, that's all. Just there. He wasn't. My husband cried when he saw me. Half the guests cried, and I smiled the whole way down because if I stopped smiling, I was going to collapse on the floor of that venue, in my grandmother's pearls, and my blush and ivory dress, and I was not going to do that. I was not going to give them that. We had been a complicated family for a long time. I don't think I understood how complicated until I was old enough to compare notes with other people. Friends, co-workers, eventually a therapist named Dr. Osi who worked out of an office on King Street West and who told me, very gently, in our 3rd session, "What you're describing is emotional coercion. I want you to sit with that word for a minute." I sat with it. It took me about 2 years to fully accept it. My father is a man who operates on loyalty as currency. You earn his approval, you spend it carefully, and the moment you do something he doesn't agree with, something as small as choosing a university he didn't endorse, or as large as marrying someone he had decided, for reasons he never fully articulated, wasn't good enough, you go into debt. And in our family, debt didn't come with a repayment plan. It came with silence and disappointment, and my mother's phone calls where she would sigh a lot and say, "Your father is just worried about you," which was her way of laundering his disapproval through softer language. My husband, whose name is Jamie, committed the sin of being from a working-class family in Sudbury. His father worked in the mines for 30 years. His mother is one of the warmest, funniest people I have ever met in my life. He has a younger sister who is studying to be an early childhood educator and who bought us a cast-iron pan as a wedding gift with a handwritten card that made me cry in the parking garage. My father is an architect. He grew up in Westmount. He has opinions about wine regions and school boards and the kind of people who live in certain neighborhoods. You can fill in the rest. I had been with Jamie for 4 years before we got engaged. My parents met him maybe 6 times in those 4 years. My mother was polite in the way that costs something. You could see the effort behind it, the careful management of her expression. My father shook his hand at Christmas, and then spent the rest of the evening talking to my brother about the Habs. When Jamie proposed, at the cabin his family rents every summer on Lake Nipissing, standing on the dock at dusk with the water going gold behind him. I called my mother from the car on the drive back to the city. She said, "Oh, well, yes, congratulations, sweetheart." Then there was a pause. Then she said, "Your father will want to talk." My father talked. He called 2 days later and spent 40 minutes explaining to me in very measured, very reasonable tones, that he had concerns about stability, about long-term compatibility, about whether I had really thought this through. He never once said Jamie's name. He referred to him as this person for the entire call. I said, "His name is Jamie, Dad." He said, "I know his name." He never used it. The engagement was 18 months long. In those 18 months, my parents came to exactly one wedding-related event, the engagement party that Jamie's parents hosted at their home in Sudbury. They drove up, stayed for an hour and 40 minutes, and left before dinner was served. My mother said she had a migraine. My father said nothing. They just left. I kept planning. I kept sending updates. I kept including them. The venue, the caterer, the rehearsal dinner. I drove to Oakville 3 times to look at mother of the bride dresses with my mother. She chose a champagne-colored gown. She was fitted for it. She paid the deposit. The rehearsal dinner was the Friday before the wedding. By 7 p.m., they hadn't arrived. By 7:30, I texted my mother. She said they were running late. By 8:15, I called my father. It went to voicemail. By 9, I was eating the chocolate lava cake Jamie's mother had ordered especially for me, because she knows it's my favorite. And I was doing the math in my head, and the math was not adding up in anyone's favor. They didn't come to the rehearsal dinner either. My mother texted me at 10:52 that night. She said my father wasn't feeling up to the drive, and that they were so sorry, and that they would definitely be there tomorrow. She added a heart emoji. A single heart emoji. After a message that told me my parents had skipped my wedding rehearsal dinner. I put my phone face down on the nightstand and I looked at the ceiling of the hotel room for a long time. They didn't come to the wedding. I found out later. Through my brother, who had the decency to text me a week later with something that barely qualified as an apology. That my father had decided the week before the wedding that he would not attend. He had told the rest of the family. He had apparently given a speech at Sunday dinner about his reservations and his position and his hope that I would come to my senses. My grandmother, who had told me she would be there, had chosen to stay home rather than go against him. A week after the wedding, I was back in our apartment in Hamilton, working through thank you cards, when my phone buzzed with a text from my father. The first contact since the wedding, it said. Need to talk to you about money for your brother's wedding. He's planning for next June and the costs are significant. Your grandmother has already committed $5,000. We're expecting family to contribute. Looking at $6,000 from you. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. $6,000. From me. For my brother's wedding. From the family that had not come to mine, who had left 3 rows of empty seats at a venue I had paid a $4,500 deposit on, whose absence had cost me money in last-minute adjustments, unused place settings, a caterer who had prepared for 12 additional guests, a florist who had already made the centerpiece for the family tables. $6,000. I sat with my phone in my hand for a very long time. I thought about calling Dr. Osi. I thought about calling Jamie. I thought about all the things I wanted to say, all the versions of the response I had composed in my head over the past week. The articulate, devastating, carefully reasoned response that laid out every single thing they had done and named it correctly, and left no room for reinterpretation or gaslighting, or my mother's soft sighing translations. Then I opened my banking app. I transferred $1 to my father's email money transfer address. In the memo line, I wrote, "Best of luck with the planning." Then I blocked his number, my mother's number, my brother's number, my aunt's number, all of them in a row, one after another, while I sat at our kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold. Jamie came home from work an hour later and found me still sitting there. He put his bag down. I showed it me and said, "What had told him?" I showed him the text. I showed him what I had sent. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Good." That was it. That was all he said. And somehow that was exactly right. The peace lasted about 3 weeks. I won't pretend it was clean or simple. There were nights when I lay awake running the same loop. What if I had said something different, done something differently, been somehow more or less of what they wanted? There was the guilt, which my therapist had warned me about, which was not really guilt so much as the withdrawal symptom of a lifelong habit of seeking approval from people who were never going to give it. I called Dr. Osi, and we talked about it. She said something I wrote down afterward. The grief you're feeling isn't for the relationship you lost. It's for the one you never actually had. I've thought about that almost every day since. The call from my father's number, which I had blocked, but which showed up on my call display as an unknown number from an Oakville area code, came on a Tuesday evening in October, about 5 weeks after the wedding. I let it ring. Then I got a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize, and when I played it, it was my father's voice, very controlled, very even, saying that he needed to speak with me about a serious matter, and that I should return his call immediately. I did not return his call. 2 days later, I opened the door of our apartment building on my way out to get groceries and found my father standing in the lobby. He was wearing his good coat. He had my mother with him, and he had, standing slightly behind him, a police officer. I stopped moving completely. My father said, "Naomi, that's my name." The first time he had said it in weeks. "We need to talk." The officer, a woman, mid-30s, looking faintly uncomfortable, said, "Are you Naomi?" I said I was. She said my father had filed a report claiming I had stolen money from him and that he was requesting a welfare check. I stood in the lobby of my own building in my coat and my grocery bags, and I looked at the woman who had carried the centerpieces my florist made for her table to the dumpster because she hadn't been there to receive them. And I looked at the man who had called my husband this person for 4 years and who had not come to my wedding and who had then texted me asking for $6,000. And I said very calmly, "Officer, I sent my father $1 via email money transfer. I have the receipt on my phone. Would you like to see it?" I showed her the transfer. I showed her his original text. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at my father. My father's jaw tightened in the way it does when something isn't going the way he planned. The officer said, "Sir, this doesn't appear to be a theft." My father said, "It's the principal." She said, "Sir." He said nothing else. My mother had not made eye contact with me once. She was looking at the floor tiles. I watched her, and I felt something shift in me. Not anger, exactly. Something older than anger. Something that had been waiting a very long time to settle. I said, "I think you should go." My father said, "Naomi, this is not." I said, "I'm not having this conversation in my building, in front of a police officer, or anywhere else right now." I paused. "Please leave." The officer suggested they go. They went. My father looked back at me once from the lobby door, and I don't know what he was looking for on my face. Regret, maybe, or the old familiar flinch. But whatever it was, he didn't find it. I went back upstairs. I sat down on the couch. I called Jamie, and he left work early, and when he got home, he made dinner and we watched something stupid on TV, and I didn't cry, which surprised me. I thought I would feel more relief, more devastation, more something. But mostly I just felt quiet, like a noise that had been running in the background of every room I'd ever been in had finally stopped. The months after that were not a straight line. Nothing like this ever is. My brother reached out in December, right before Christmas, with a message that was almost an apology. It acknowledged that things hadn't gone well, and that he understood if I was upset, and that he hoped we could eventually move forward as a family. It was the kind of message that takes the shape of accountability without the substance of it. I read it carefully. I appreciated that he had tried. I was not ready to respond, and I told him that. I said I needed time and that I would reach out when I was ready. I'm still deciding when that is. My grandmother sent a card in February. Just a card, the kind she always sends. A watercolor painting of snow on a birch tree. a note inside in her careful cursive. She wrote that she was sorry for the pain, and that she loved me and that she hoped I knew that. She did not say she had made a mistake by not coming. But she also didn't ask for anything. I kept the card. I put it on the shelf above my desk. I haven't called her yet, but I think I will. What I know now, that I didn't know at the beginning of all of this, is that the hardest thing was not the wedding. The wedding was the moment of absolute clarity after years of squinting. The hardest thing was the time before it. All the dinners where I'd laughed at the wrong moments. All the calls where I'd softened my voice. All the versions of myself I had quietly edited to stay within the frame of what they approved of. I spent years managing their feelings about my life, and what I lost in the process was time. Years of it. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it because it's true. And because the first step toward anything better was being honest with myself about what had actually happened. Jamie and I spent our first Christmas as a married couple with his family in Sudbury. His mother made tourtière from his grandmother's recipe, and his father fell asleep in the armchair before 10 o'clock. And his sister taught me 3 words in Ojibwe that I've since forgotten. But I'm going to look up again. It was loud and warm and a little chaotic, and no one was managing anyone. I called Dr. Osi the week after we got back and I told her it had been a good Christmas. She said, "Good." She said it the same way Jamie had said it in the kitchen that night after I showed him the transfer. Plain, no performance, just acknowledgement. I'm 31 years old. I spent the first 28 of those years waiting for something from my family that I now understand they were never going to give. Not because they're evil people, not because there's a simple villain in this story, but because people sometimes pass their damage forward without ever examining it, and sometimes you are standing in the direct what's happening before you even understand what's happening. I still have the receipt for the $1 transfer. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because it was the first decision I made entirely for myself, without running it through the filter of how they would react, what they would think, whether it would finally be the thing that made my father look at me with something other than managed disappointment. It cost me $1 to find out what I was worth to them, and it cost me nothing to stop asking.